For our last module, one of the things that we're going to talk about is culturally responsive teaching. And we sometimes abbreviate that to CRT. So you hear me switching between culturally responsive teaching and CRT. It means the same thing. And when we talk about culturally responsive teaching, we're talking about something that promotes student learning by making instruction relevant, inclusive, and connected to a student's lived experiences. And when students see their cultures, their languages, and their identities reflected and valued in the classroom, a lot of times they are more motivated, confident, and engaged. And we're going to cover some key ways that culturally responsive teaching enhances a student's learning. So the first thing we want to look at is it begins with understanding a student's background, their values, and their family structures. And remember, your normal is not everyone else's normal. Your family and your experiences are yours and yours unique. They are not the same as everyone else's. And so when teachers acknowledge and respect these differences, students feel seen and they feel safe, which increases their willingness to participate, to take risk, and ask questions. And trust is really the foundation for deep learning. And so these practices really help students feel valued. And an example of how do we build stronger relationships and trust with the students, by one example is classroom rituals. A teacher may greet students at the door in their home language. So it could be, anything from Spanish to French to Hindi to Mandarin to Japanese to Dutch. All of those to signal inclusion. Next is connecting learning to students' real lives. So students learn best when new content connects to what they already know. Culturally responsive teaching uses students' cultural knowledge, histories, and community context as assets. And these connections help students make sense of complex concepts and see the relevance of academic material. So how can we do this? What's an example? One example would be like if you're teaching a science lesson, right? So you do a unit on ecosystems, including indigenous ecological knowledge or local environmental practices. Or you could do a math problem context, and instead of using generic textbook problems, you as a teacher could use scenarios from students' communities. An example of that would be calculating the cost of an item at a local market, mercado, or creating budgets for real family celebrations. So we're going to do like in a Hispanic family or a Spanish-speaking family or a Mexican, actually this would be more Mexican family, right? Because it's a Mexican holiday, would be Day of the Dead. How can we budget for Day of the Dead? We only have $100 to spend. And then you would give like a list of different items that they can pick and choose from, but they can only spend $100. So that would be like a simple math lesson that you could do. Culturally responsive teaching also increases student engagement. And so when lessons incorporate these diverse perspectives, culturally meaningful examples, and varied learning styles, students are more intellectually and emotionally invested. And those engaged students interact more with the content, more with their classmates, and more with teachers, leading to better outcomes for them. So how can we do this? What's an example of how to increase student engagement? Well, you can use multicultural literature, which we're going to look at that in this module too. Students read texts from diverse authors instead of only traditional canon, meaning only traditional books. So like if we're talking about Thanksgiving, we only read about like the white version of Thanksgiving. We don't read about the indigenous version. We don't read about the Wampanoags and Thanksgiving from their perspective. Right? So we are really trying to include more diverse perspectives on the same event. Also, choice in assignments. Students choose formats that align with their strengths. So maybe you have someone who grew up where storytelling is very important, especially within Indigenous communities. So storytelling. Or maybe you have someone present the same thing, but they use digital art, or you have a debate or a presentation or written analysis. So you're using all these different formats, but they're covering the same thing, right? They're still doing the same project. They're just using what they can do best. Culturally responsive teaching also incorporates multiple ways of knowing and learning. So different cultures may emphasize collaboration, oral traditions, storytelling, problem solving, or hands-on learning. And CRT adapts instruction to include these modes rather than relying solely on traditional Western lecture-based methods, and this really does broaden access to materials. So if you're new to college, you may not have experienced this, but going into a college classroom and having a lecture, having someone just talk to you for an hour and 15 minutes, really talk at you and read directly from the PowerPoint is so boring. And that is how us professors and most of us older generation, that's how we went to college. So you'll notice us trying new things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But if you have a professor that's like, I want to show videos or I want you to do hands-on activities, it's to try to get more students involved and more students engaged. And it's incorporating those different learning styles. That's what they're doing. So how can we do this like at a K through 12 level? Well, you can do collaborative group work, and everybody hates group work because only one person ends up doing the work. But some cultures really emphasize that collective engagement and collectivism. Group problem solving supports those students while still meeting academic goals. The kinesthetic learner, science or math lessons incorporate hands-on experiments rather than just let's read and do a worksheet. Read and do a worksheet. Let's actually like get in there and do like hands-on experiments. Let's get up and move around the classroom. So those are just ways that you can speak to different students' learning styles and incorporate those to get them more engaged. Culturally responsive teaching also promotes higher order thinking, not just like memorization, not just recall. So it doesn't really water down the material. It encourages that deep analysis, right? So contrary to stereotypes, it's not easier teaching, it's actually more rigorous. And by validating students' cultural experiences, teachers can push students to engage in analysis, critique, debate, and problem solving. And students really learn to apply academic skills in a real world context. How can we do this? Debates. Students debate a global issue, access to water, using evidence from both scientific research and cultural perspectives. Or another way you could do this is analyzing bias. Students review media sources for cultural assumptions or stereotypes, promoting critical literacy. A great example of this is looking at Hurricane Katrina. You look at pictures of white people versus pictures of African American people doing the exact same thing. They're both going for food. They're looking for food and trying to navigate through floodwaters. But under the caption of the white people, it's like, oh, these victims of the hurricane are looking for food sources. But under this caption of an African American, it will say African Americans or blacks looting for food during Hurricane Katrina. So one was looking and scavenging for food. What they were doing was okay, but minority people, what they were doing was illegal because they were looting. So look for like analyzing that bias. And history, doing this in history is so easy because it's really easy to find historical bias. Culturally responsive teaching also reduces cultural and linguistic barriers. So it supports multilingual learners by valuing their home languages, right? Using culturally familiar examples and scaffolding vocabulary. And this reduces misunderstanding and builds stronger language and academic proficiency. So how can we do this in the classroom? Translanguaging, and I know it looks like it's spelled wrong there. That's just spell check for you, but it's actually spelled correctly, I promise. Students use both their home language and English to solve problems, take notes, or brainstorm. You don't penalize a student for thinking in their home language and then translating it to English. You encourage that. Okay, how can we think of this in Spanish, right? Because that's where your brain wants to go. So let's think of it in Spanish, let's brainstorm, and then let's put it into English because we have to for classroom purposes. But it's not denying them their first language. Visual supports, images, anchor charts, gestures, graphic organizers to help build that gap within the language. Right? So we're going to reduce it. We're going to encourage, it is okay for you to use your first language. That's fine. But like for state testing and academic purposes, we need to translate into English. Right? And we need to build on your English skills, and we need to work with that vocabulary so that you are more successful as you move through the American education system. I do want to go back just really quickly to this linguistic one. I do this in my classes. I have a lot of Spanish speaking students, and I don't mind if they want to give a presentation in Spanish because it depends on the classroom and depends on the environment, right? So, and I know that we're in an American education system, and I know that in order for them to like pass, they're going to have to be proficient in English. But I'm also like, I don't mind if you want to, like, if you're more comfortable giving it in Spanish to the class, write it up in English. Give me like a little separate, English script, and then present in Spanish because I can translate it in Spanish. You also, with our phones and with the technology, we can also translate really quickly. You can use your phone to translate. It is okay, I think. This is my opinion. I think it is okay to use those tools and use what we have in order to make students feel more comfortable in situations like that. That's just my personal opinion. Take it or leave it. Okay. Culturally responsive teaching also counters bias and stereotypes. And we've talked about bias and stereotypes, so you should know what that is. But when students encounter accurate, diverse perspectives in curriculum and instruction, it challenges those stereotypes. It improves classroom climate and ensures that students from marginalized groups are not limited by low expectations or implicit bias. So how can we do this in class? Diverse representation. Classroom posters, books, and examples feature scientists, authors, and leaders from a wide range of cultures. You don't have just pictures of white people in your room, right? You have everybody represented. Addressing microaggressions. Teachers name and correct stereotypes or biased statements when they occur. That is something that you're going to have to get used to doing. And you're going to notice it more and more and more as you move through your careers. Also, these little microaggressions that are happening. And lastly, culturally responsive teaching, it affirms identity and builds academic confidence. And students who feel their identities are appreciated rather than ignored or devalued develop a stronger sense of belonging. A strong academic identity increases persistence, resilience, and long-term achievement. So how can you do this in the classroom? You could even do this at work too. I hope you guys know that. You can do this at work, you can do this in the classroom. But affirmation strategies. Teachers intentionally praise students' cultural strengths. Like, you are so smart because you speak more than one language. Or you're really great when it comes to like leadership in the classroom or even community leadership or even resilience, overcoming barriers, excuse me, that have been put up and overcoming those. Representation in curriculum, reading text, and we're going to do this week, this module, reading text by authors who share students' cultural backgrounds, and it normalizes their experiences. Again, not just from one perspective, not just giving the Hispanic viewpoint. You are not always going to have 100% Hispanic students in your classrooms. You're not going to have 100% Native American students in your classrooms. You're not going to have 100% African American. And nowadays, you are not going to have 100% white people in your classroom. You have got to recognize the different cultures represented in your classroom and be able to speak to each of those. Now, do you have to go out of your way and like go overboard? No, but you do need to represent every culture that is before you that you are teaching to, right? Just like you need to do things for every different type of student learner. You don't just need to do the lecture and the worksheet. You need to do hands-on, like lecturing is fine, but hands-on activities, things where we can really like get up and move around in the classroom, things where we can think critically, not just like, oh, here's a worksheet, go in your textbook and look for things, right? We don't want the boring stuff. So what does it all mean in the end? Culturally responsive teaching is more than a set of strategies. It is a mindset that values and leverages students' cultural knowledge, their experiences, and identities to promote really meaningful learning. By building trust, connecting instruction to students' lives, and fostering high expectations alongside strong support, culturally responsive teaching not only enhances academic achievement, but it also empowers students to see themselves as capable learners. And when classrooms reflect and honor that diversity, every student has the opportunity to thrive both academically and personally. So we want to tap into students. We want to tap into their cultural strengths. We want to build trust. We want to increase their engagement. We want to make our content meaningful. You don't have to make it meaningful to every single student every single day, but you do have to make it meaningful to your students throughout the course of the semester or the academic year more than once, right? You want to be doing this almost on a weekly basis if you're in a K through 12 classroom. And you also want to promote high levels of academic thinking. So as a teacher, in your mindset, that values and leverages students, it's about cultural knowledge, it's about experiences, and it's about identities to promote that meaningful learning.